Civil Society and Think Tank Forum launching event. My name is Franco Egro. I am a career journalist. I started as a reporter and then moved to England for 10 years with the BBC World Service. 2 years I spent in Germany with Deutsche Welle Radio, and then on my return I directed 2 national TV stations, and at the moment I'm doing a weekly, twice a weekly actually, TV show at Euronews Albania called Balkan Talks. It is my privilege to conduct today a panel of distinguished values. We have here the ambassador of the Federal Republic of Germany, His Excellency Mr. Peter Zingraf. Mr. Zingraf, thank you very much for coming. With us here, part of this panel, is Signor Luigi Matirolo, who is the Deputy Ambassador of the Republic of Italy in Albania. We are honored to have here Ms. Sodeta Barbulushi, who is the advisor to the Prime Minister of Albania on Western Balkans and EU affairs. Thank you very much, Ms. Barbulushi, for being here. And last but not least, a very good friend, Mr. Andy Dobrushi, who is the director of Western Balkans of the Open Society Foundation. Thank you very much indeed, Andy, for being here and for arranging this launching event. Mr. Zingraf, while I was getting ready for this event, actually I checked something which is very basic. Which are the goals of the Berlin process? And as a veteran journalist, here they are. 4, resolution of outstanding and internal issues. 2, achieving the reconciliation within and between societies in the region, enhancing regional economic cooperation. Number 3 and 4, laying the foundations for sustainable growth. We all live in the Balkans, and we are all fully aware of what is happening and how difficult this part of the world is. It was only yesterday that I had a very good interview with a Serbian politician whom I was interviewing for the second time in 4 months. The first one was immediately after the French-German proposal, and he was optimistic, but with a degree of reserves. And when before we started the interview, I asked him, Mr. Chanak, what do you think? What is going on? And he said, welcome to the Balkans, my younger friend. But I was thinking the Balkan process is needed precisely because of the situation, because of the tensions, because of the amplitudes of the developments in our region. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. It's a pleasure and an honor to be invited. Oh, all right. Good morning. It's a pleasure and an honor to be invited to this launching, and it's the first Berlin Process Summit that comes to the region, so sort of full circle of this adventure. And I come back to your direct question of, as you called it, of Balkans process. I will stick with the name of the Berlin process. By the way, living in Berlin can be quite Balkanic, but this is a side remark, just looking at Berlin administration and so on. The first summit here after the Berlin process had done a sort of full circle, starting in Berlin and doing a physical summit in Berlin last year, and now I think it's high time to bring it to the region. But with this comes high responsibility, and the process is a process and not just one summit.
and the accents of the process change from year to year with changing and rotating venues and hosts, which at the same time help to spread the ownership of Western Balkan policies and EU web integration among the EU member states. And Italy was among the hosts of those years. At the same time, and that's more to your immediate question, the Berlin process established a regular forum for direct Western Balkan 6 government-to-government context, and at least my guest country and the government of my guest country always stresses, Prime Minister Rama always stresses this dimension that this process has brought. One of the constants of this ever-changing process was notably the consistent civil society process. Organized civil society gives input, monitors implementation of results of the Berlin process, but monitors general reform path of the countries in the formal process of EU accession. So for Albania, I have to state that we are in a new phase since July 21, and the formal process is a real formal process in action, which changes the whole setting. I believe that the strength of the Berlin process is its flexibility and its non-institutionalization. It has never, must never, and will never be a substitute or a competitor for the real process run by the EU institutions and the EU member states. I believe only by overloading the expectations to the expectations to the Berlin process, it makes sense to regard the Berlin process flexibility as a weakness. And let me just mention in this regard the very important debate about pre-accession phasing in of instruments of convergence gap. I really welcome that a direct dialogue with the EU Commission is on the way, especially after the DG NEAR visit of my Director General, Mr. Koopman, and President von der Leyen's proposal. I would feel that overloading the Berlin process with the core of that debate could be difficult, and another thing is to debate in civil society and think tank context about this, but institutionally let's separate the two things. So times have changed since the beginning of Berlin process 2014, but I still think if we didn't have it, someone should invent it or invent something similar, a Balkans process. Yeah. So something I think is needed and will do good. My government, coming to goals, which has been asked by the Albanian hosts of this year's edition to support the summit preparation, continues to stress the regional connectivity and integration as a main or perhaps the main goal, especially the common regional market. And I know that from my work here in Albania, that beyond individual challenges regarding business climate, rule of law, transparency and so on, the limited size of the single Western Balkan 6 markets is an element that makes foreign direct investment more difficult. I'm convinced that private investment, which brings capital, jobs, and transformative power, has to be boosted and strengthened, and the Berlin process should be one prominent instrument to do it. Civil society is playing a key role in the underlying societal and institutional transformation of the region. Be it in the framework of the formal EU accession process, be it in the framework of our more flexible Berlin process that has come to Tirana. Unfortunately, I myself will be leaving at the end of July after the completion of my 4 years term. So I'm not in the lucky position to be here for the ministerials and the summit. So I can only cross fingers for the outcome and the preparation. And I thank Open Society for the invitation, and I wish you, I wish all of us a successful and dynamic launching event. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Very kind of you. Signor Mattiarello, one of the last declarations of the Prime Minister of the Republic of Italy, Meloni, was, "I am convinced that the best way to fully stabilize the Balkans is to anchor it permanently into the European Union family of values." And how does this event reflect basically this mission, this assistance that Italy is providing to all the Balkan countries to move ahead into the EU integration process?
Thank you. Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So thank you for the question, and thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here today. And I mean, the words of the Prime Minister were very clear and very strong. I couldn't have said it better, I have to say. And I think we have to put them in the context of a changed world, because since almost a year and a half ago, the world has changed. In 22nd February 2022, when Russia attacked Ukraine and invaded Ukraine, we have to look at Europe and at the world in a different perspective. What was then for Italy and for many other countries a priority and an objective, which is to integrate the Western Balkans into the European Union, has now become an imperative and strategic priority and objective. And we have to use and to see this event that has completely basculated the whole continent as an opportunity to accelerate the integration process. And we think, and we have always been a very firm supporter of the Berlin process, because we think that the Berlin process is a very crucial instrument in order to bring the region closer together, to foster regional integration, and to pave the way to the European integration of the region. And so we have always been, Italy has always been supporter of the Berlin process. But one of the objectives of the Berlin process is to enhance economic development of the region, which is also one of our main objectives on a bilateral level. Because we think that, I mean, we are convinced that only enhancing development, only improving living conditions and having the economies grow, then we can also tackle many of the problems that this region has in terms of brain drain, in terms of very strong emigration of youth. And also, if we enhance the economic development, we also have more investments, and I mean, it's a virtuous cycle. Absolutely. That can also fill the gap between the Western Balkans and the European countries, also from an economic point of view. And so we think that there has to be an acceleration that has to come from Brussels, so from the member states. We have to give the Western Balkan countries something more that has been given until now, because they have been on a waiting list for several years. Many reforms have been made, many efforts have been made. Of course, there is still a lot to do, but we have to encourage this. We should give probably more access to the European single market. Europe should also provide more IPA funds, more pre-accession funds, and also from like a bottom-up approach, we also think that the region has to do more itself. The countries have to do more reforms. They have to be more proactive in improving the standards of institutional standards, the rule of law, a fight against corruption, and all the plagues.
As we call them homeworks.
As
we call them homeworks.
Yes, exactly. So if we have this two-way effort, two-way approach, then probably the goal can be closer, and we can see the region integrated into the European Union in a closer future. Okay.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Matiriolo. Talking about Albania, and I guess it is in the DNA of all the Albanian politicians, let alone Prime Minister Rama, on how serious they are about the integration of the country into the EU structures. Ms. Barbulushi, I just wanted to ask you, what are the expectations of the Albanian government from this year's Berlin process?
Thank you, Franco. Good morning, everyone. I'm very pleased to be here, and I thank the host of the forum for inviting me to speak on behalf of the Albanian government. As a way of appreciation, in fact, I would say that this is one of the most inclusive civil society forums, having representatives of organizations from from the region, but also from the neighboring EU member states. And I think that's a very important contribution, not only at the level of policy making, at the level of those who will participate at the ministerials, but also at the level of civil society. Indeed, Albania supported very strongly the relaunch of Berlin process last year for two main reasons. A, because it is in fact in the DNA of Albanian foreign policy, in this government's foreign policy, the regional cooperation. Regional cooperation, good neighborly relations is in fact one of the main pillars of our foreign policy. And the necessity of cooperating more in the region became greater in the context of the Russian aggression in Ukraine, and that was obvious, not only for practical, pragmatic reasons, but also from a geopolitical perspective. And the second reason we supported the relaunch of Berlin process was indeed the link, the very strong link, connection between Berlin process and EU integration process.
Absolutely.
So I'm glad you put the question on Berlin process in the context of EU integration. And what we have seen in the past year is indeed a greater presence of Europe, of EU, if you like, in the Balkans.
Definitely.
I would say it's a greater awareness that we cannot go on with the region as business as usual, as it were. Both in the political sense, but also in the economic sense. And the relaunch of Berlin process was indeed a demonstration of that greater awareness. But we also saw a number of other very important landmark, I would say, political developments, like the organization of the first EU Western Balkans summit in the region last December. We also saw, of course, the granting of candidate status to Bosnia, the decision to grant visa liberalization after many years to Kosovo, and so on. So we do see that Europeans are more present, there is awareness. Now, how does that reflect on regional cooperation? As it was said here, bringing the process in the region means stronger sense of ownership. And for us, that is very important. From a political, but also from policy perspective, it's important that we build a policy agenda which works for the region, works for countries of the Western Balkans. In that sense, we are still in the process of preparing the priorities. We are cooperating very closely with our colleagues in the German government, but also other EU member states who are participants in this initiative. Last month, we had the advisors and representatives of the capitals of all participating states of Berlin process in Tirana to discuss on the priorities and the direction of the process, in fact. And in that sense, we are still preparing which are the expectations and the deliverables. But we'll very much maintain the DNA of the process, which is to bring the region closer to the European Union. And that means both in the political sense, in the direction of reforms, in the direction of underlining the political perspective, but also strengthening or indeed building a stronger, a better social, economic, developmental perspective, or what is called now in the European Commission service a new growth pact for the Western Balkans. And that is for us very important. It was here also mentioned by the Italian colleague how important it is to keep this connection between the political dimension and the social economical dimension of the process. So in that sense, we'll keep and we'll maintain the priorities of the process, like connectivity, not only among the countries of the region, but also with EU member states, here completing some of the initiatives that some of you are familiar with, like the green lanes, but also going towards integrated border crossings with the countries of EU member states which are bordering the region. Improving digital connectivity. We still see that the region is outside, still remains outside the digital map, the European digital map, and that is despite having now a roaming agreement within our countries. We still are very far from having the same similar arrangement or legal arrangement with the countries of the EU. We will emphasize cybersecurity as a new topic which has gained new importance in the region, particularly in the aftermath of the attacks. Yes, we were target of last year, but not only us, and Montenegro after us. And that is one of the policy areas which are of strategic importance for us, but also the EU, and will very much emphasize the need to have pan-European solutions to these European challenges. We'll also focus more than before on issues which have become of necessity, of importance, in fact, in the past couple of years, like food security, food safety, and so on in the region. More speaking of the policy, more of the policy agenda, and one area which we are bringing forward more strongly, and we are emphasizing more, is the component of mobility, youth, and human capital. Excellent. This is something which is in fact in line with the priorities of the German government. Last year we signed 3 mobility agreements which would indeed facilitate the free movement of professionals, of students and of citizens among all 6 countries, even though bilaterally we had such legal arrangement. But now that once the agreements are ratified, that would make it possible for all citizens, and we'll continue in that path, having 2 agreements in process in the same policy area. But we'll also prepare, and we are here in close cooperation with the Commission, proposals with regard to the extension of European research and higher education area to the Western Balkans, which means building capacities of universities. Before I close this first part of my answer, I think it's very important to see what we can, it's only so much we can do regionally. So this is a 2-way process, and I think it was mentioned here by my by 2 co-panelists here, how important it is that now we have enhanced approach on the part of the EU. And in that direction, I think the proposal of the President of the Commission, von der Leyen, in Bratislava was very welcome, with the 4 pillars of how to enhance this relationship, but not with the region. Now, what I think we need to work on and use this month until the Leader Summit is indeed to prepare very concrete proposals on what it means to open some pre-structural funds, what we call these sort of more transitional instruments, particularly for those areas which are of strategic importance to both the EU and the Western Balkans. Absolutely. And some of these areas I already mentioned as part of our priorities in this process. The second question is how to make the region part of European mechanisms for crisis response, for emergency response, and so on, to make the region part of the responses to challenges which are pan-European. And that is a necessity now rather than later. Of course, it was mentioned here some proposals that have been tabled, in fact, by civil society, with regard to the possibility of phasing in the region to the single market, gradual integration, and so on. In fact, Prime Minister Rama mentioned some of these ideas and underlined the importance of bringing the region closer to a single market. As far as Burgos Summit, it was immediately in the heels of the pandemic.
Summit, yeah.
And some of these proposals have been elaborated by civil society. And have indeed contributed to this policy debate. Now it is important to see, in a way, the ball is in the courts of the EU. What can be done in this regard? It's very important. A term that Ambassador Zingraf mentioned, convergence. It was indeed one of the main 4 objectives of the Berlin process since its launch in 2014. What we see now after, of course, the economic crisis of 2008, 2009, what we see with the pandemics, with the war in Ukraine, is that this convergence gap has widened rather than been bridged in the past few years. And this is a question for all of us in the EU and outside the EU in the Balkans. And it is a question that needs to be answered, I think, now even more given the context of the war, and given in the context that we have new candidate countries like Moldova and Ukraine. So the question is how we treat the Balkans and what new instruments we provide for the Balkans to become part of sectoral policies, part of joint European mechanisms, and indeed provide a developmental and social economic perspective. So I'll be happy to get back to some of these questions, and I'll leave it there for a moment.
Thank you very much, Ms. Barbelushi, for being so straightforward and on the point all the time. Thank you. Actually, when before we started, I was thinking, who should be the first speaker? The organizer of the event or the distinguished guest? And then, as good Albanians, we decided that guests first. Ante, you organized this event, this launch, but my question to you would be, which are the priorities for the Civil Society and Think Tank Forum 2023, and what will be different this year from the previous events of more or less the same character? Thank you.
Thank you. Hello? It's okay? Okay, good morning. Thank you, Frank, for the question. As always, I was thinking exactly the same, as you said, like the benefits of speaking the first or the last, but in this case, I think it's much more beneficial to speak the last, hearing all the esteemed co-panelists, like who basically provided a very great overview and detailed overview of the Berlin process so far, and what it has meant for the region, especially particularly emphasizing the complementarity to the EU integration process. Because of this long process, actually, we are 10 years into the Berlin process and 20 years into Thessaloniki commitments. So obviously, the time takes its toll. World is different. So I think it's absolutely important and necessary to take a stock and look back, like, okay, what was done then, what have we been through, throughout these 20 years or last year in these processes, and how much and how important was also the Berlin process initiation 10 years ago, because it gave a very important impetus to the whole EU integration process.
Balkans, yeah.
And let's not forget, this process was also trying to deal with the very dark past of the region, which sometimes through the integration process does not come into the picture, And unfortunately, our region is not immune to the clouds, dark clouds, like it's already, we're seeing one, now, which is affecting a lot the situation and the political situation, economic situation, but also the status of the regional cooperation.
Absolutely.
So we much vie for the region. So we live in a very different world, from 10 or 20 years ago. The region is caught between two worlds itself. The region is caught between a very dark world, which is represented by the Russian aggression in Ukraine, and not to mention, the effects of the pandemic before, etc., etc. and the world which we all aspire and we have always dreamed of, you know, the integration in the European Union, which for us remains the only, as it's becoming evident, it's is the only plan. There is no alternative to that. So I think the European Union path for us has not become only a rhetoric. It's not a rhetoric for us. I mean, it might be for the politicians, you know, like as we see it often. But for people, for the countries, for citizens, obviously it remains a very, very important objective. And I think the civil society is what it's trying to do differently this time is to make sure that it energizes a process which encompasses like many, many important elements, which of course are very crucial, particularly in the current moment. We were with many colleagues of ours both in Brussels and Berlin like last month. Everybody is emphasizing the new momentum. There is a new momentum. There is a new momentum of enlargement, and I think we can only thank Ukraine, you know, for that, like because it has rekindled also very much so the understanding from the and the energy from also from the European Union Commission, but also member states vis-a-vis the enlargement process. The thing is, how do we respond to that? Are we still in a phase that we are looking for details of the process, etc., or we want to engage very much energetically on issues which relate to the region? Because if you just look at the data and the of the Eurobarometers last year, you see that the citizens of the region are very much concerned. You know, are concerned of the war in Ukraine, are concerned of the security and geopolitical configuration in the region. They want the European Union and NATO to become more basically active and cooperate even more, you know, because of the situation with Ukraine. So all these elements, I think, became also very important for the civil society in view of the summit that will take place in October. As Odeta and all the co-panelists mentioned, you know, there is this reinvigoration of the Berlin process, started from last year with the German government and the process that took place physically, as Ambassador mentioned, last year in Berlin. And it was very important because it saw the signature of 3 very important agreements, which we hope that they would give a new impetus of also to the regional cooperation. But we see how, you know, it can get stuck very easily in one country, and then you know the process affects the whole region. So I think this shows how important it is also for the civil society to engage and push and create this pressure for the governments in the region. And we also imagine this as a process which would create a new dynamic, not only between our civil society in the region and think tanks and the governments in the region, but also through with the member states and the European Commission. Always being mindful what Ambassador Zingraf mentioned, you know, that these are 2 processes which are distinct from each other. European integration is the big mothership, I think, of the whole process, whereas the Berlin process is more targeted. But we always seen these regional processes, starting from Berlin process and also local initiatives like Open Balkan, as the kind of the energizers, you know, like, or the agencies coming from the region. And that's why we insisted so much this year when we learned also during the last EU-Balkan summit last year that the venue would be in Tirana.
Absolutely.
We thought that the civil society in the region should take this opportunity and organize and co-host and put a display of not only the resources that we have, but also the ideas, creative ideas that are coming. Odeta mentioned very much the ideas that are in discussion and have been supported also by us as a foundation, but also by other donors and other actors in the region. But the nominatives there are manifold, you know, like gradual integration, staged accession, and you see all sorts of proposals that are coming out, you know, which are addressing really thorny issues, which in the end of the day relate to the convergence issues, you know, like. Because the region is lagging behind. Like, I mean, these 20 years, what is happening and what we're seeing is that the comparative basis is not with Germany anymore and other developed countries, but it is with countries which joined recently the European Union. And we see how many faults, the difference in assistance, but also in terms of performance, this distance is becoming bigger and bigger, making it even more difficult. This year, what we're trying to do differently is also to create a momentum, and I think the event itself speaks for it, because we want to engage from the very beginning with the process, with the ministerials who are working to prepare the agenda recommendation for the Leaders Summit. So the civil society has been plugged in from the very first moment. All our colleagues have worked tirelessly, like from the beginning of this year, to make sure, jointly in cooperation also with the previous organizers in Berlin last year. So we create a continuum, a continuity and a logical continuity of the topics and the issues, but also adding issues very important for ourselves, you know, related to issues of green energy transition, digital transformation, mobility and migration, access to single market, and the politics of enlargement and security, which I think are very, very extremely relevant, you know, and you're going to hear later, subsequently, all my colleagues whom I thank very much. They are joining us online, and I see all of them like listening very attentively, you know, so, but...
And getting ready.
Yeah, and getting ready, but I mean, the important task for us was also, you know, when we started upon this journey, we got together with our colleagues here. You know, Ardian is here from the Cooperation and Development Institute. Ioannis is also online here from the Hellenic Foundation for European and Foreign Policy, ELIAMEP. And we always discussed, you know, they always reminded me that we need to burst open the Western Balkan bubble, you know. This was also one of the regions to move away from this introverted look, you know, that we always get with each other, you know, and discuss the same issues. And we always have like more or less the same opinion, etc. But we thought like it was very important to extend this also to the other sister organizations or other think tanks also from the region, making sure that this regional cooperation extends also towards like organizations in the EU member states. Basically, what can I say? We're hoping very much to have concrete recommendations for the governments, but recommendations which are implementable. Yeah. We're not trying to have like 25 policy recommendations. We're not trying to shoot for the stars. We're trying to be very realistic, and I think you're going to hear also subsequently from the working thematic groups that we're trying to be very, very focused, you know. And there we're engaging not only with all the organizations from the regions, but I think also broadly with, we've had lots of interest also for, as I mentioned, from organizations and think tanks from the European Union, making sure that what we say and what we come up with as recommendations do not echo only with our own government, but also with the European public opinion as well. So I'll stop here, and thank you very much for the question.
Thank you, Mr. Dobrushi. And I think that is the end of this panel, and we will pass the floor to the other thematic groups to discuss what they have to. So, Mr. Ambassador Zingraf, thank you very much indeed. Mr. Deputy Ambassador Matiroli, thank you very much indeed. Ms. Varvalushi, thank you. Andy, thank you. So, Mr. Ambassador, I think it's time for you to leave. Thank you. Thank you. I know. I know. Thank you. Thank you. Pleasure. Part of this launch, I will give the floor to the moderator of this period, Mr. Mr. Johannes Almacolas. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Egro. Thank you, Franco. It's a great pleasure to be with you. I'm really sorry I cannot be in Tirana, but of course, for me and my organization, the Hellenic Foundation to European Foreign Policy, ELIAMEP, think tank in Athens, is a great pleasure to team up with the Open Society Foundation Western Balkans and the CDI Institute in Tirana in co-organizing this year's Civil Society and Think Tank Forum. We will focus now on the thematic working groups that have been put together by the organizers. We have 7 thematic working groups, and we have here the representatives from the lead organizations in each of the thematic working group. We have tried to put together, of course, thematic working groups that will capture the essence of what is happening in Europe today with the Russian aggression and the war in Ukraine and how this is changing the enlargement process, but also try to connect with the debates and the ideas that have been proposed in order to accelerate the accession process of the Western Balkans, but also how the Western Balkans will connect with the key policy agendas in the European Union. And of course, we have tried to connect with the priorities of the Albanian government when it comes to the this year's Berlin Process Summit. So somehow we have tried to put together all these priorities on all these ideas, and we have come up with 7 themes, broad themes that will be discussed by civil society and think tanks from the Western Balkans, but also from the EU member states. And I will give directly the floor to the first, the lead of the first thematic working group. The first thematic working group is energy, and I will invite the lead organization, Renewables and Environmental Regulatory Institute, RERI, from Serbia. I believe we have both Jovan Rajic and Mirko Popovic with us, and they will have 5 minutes to present the work that they're planning to do with in the energy working group. So Mirko and Jovan, the floor is yours. I think we do not have sound. Mirko, do you need to unmute your mic?
Yes. Sorry. Is it okay now?
It's okay now. Just start from the beginning, please.
Thank you very much. So once again, thank you for introduction, and it is our great pleasure to be coordinator of energy thematic working group. Reri was coordinator last year as well. So we see this opportunity to work more and to contribute more to achievement of recommendations, also recommendations from last year, because we think that the Civil Society Forum is a continuous process. It is a long-term process, and it should rally on previous achievements. So for RERI, the important is that we had the recommendation from last year, which will be very much in focus still. So it is not difficult to define key issues, because we need, as in the EU, we need sustainable, just and ambitious energy transition in the in the Western Balkans. What we want to achieve more is the enhanced and stronger role of civil society and experts community. I highlight this because I think that we need to work together, and the decision makers from region should use all available resources, meaning skills, knowledge, partnership, to make a remarkable progress in the very short period, because we don't have so much time, because the 2030 will be tipping point actually for the region and for the East. So the main issue is how to achieve this kind of transition through decarbonization, through diversification of renewable energy, or particularly renewable energy sources, but also to take care about not to diversify energy sources in such manner that since now most of the countries are stuck with coal, to be stuck with another fossil fuel. This is important. For this we need a robust and sound financial and policy framework. What are key discussion points to be tackled within this civil society forum? As I said, recommendations from last year to see what was achieved, what are success and what was unsuccessful. Then another issue is we want to create a synergy and joint advocacy framework for civil society actors to work on regional targets rather than on national targets. The third point is commitments in strategic policy documents related to coal phase out, particularly in the NECPs. This is very important, because this is the moment we have to develop and submit final NECPs next June. And the fourth point is improving on financial framework and enabling circulating of enough resources for achievement of this goal. Next slide, please. So the composition of thematic working group is established more than less, but some innovations is brought this year. First of all, already established experts advisory committee, a group of experienced regional experts, which will maintain the whole process together with RERI. Then we will use also contacts and communication with the thematic group 2025. Also, as it was said, we will include think tanks, independent research, not only from Western Balkans, but also from the EU. And what we find important are financial institutions and agencies such as EBRD, EIB, World Bank, and similar financial institutions, which also strongly influence energy transition in the region. Next slide, please. We plan to work very much on engagement with public by two most important part of this pillar of our action is strong media campaign and strong public outreach. I think we constantly should work on promotion of civil society forum within Berlin process as a tool for more democratic and more accountable governance in the region. But also we want to introduce, this is very important, before the Leaders Summit, we want to work on bilateral communication with key decision makers and to endorse them to support our recommendations, because we think that what should be improved in the process is that civil society recommendations should be stronger supported by decision makers. So we will organize this communication with specific stakeholders to make them engaged, introduce, and once the Leaders Summit is come in October in Tirana, we want that key stakeholders are already very familiar and we hope supportive towards our recommendations from civil society for 2023. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Mirko. Excellent introduction, and you give me also the opportunity to mention a couple of points about the concept that we have as this year's Civil Society Forum, in which we are trying not to innovate so much, but to make the process a bit more effective. And the ideas have been mentioned by Mirko, and I will just reiterate them here. The fact that we are trying to connect with the ideas, the recommendations from the previous year's Civil Society Forum, and also to cooperate with hopefully next year's Civil Society Forum, so that there is a continuity in the process and also a continuity in the ideas that we hope that are more actionable, more effective. Also, we are trying this year, and this was mentioned by Mirko, to extend even more the participation, the membership of the working groups to include also officials, also policymakers. So it's not just think tankers sometimes speaking ideas and things that are not necessarily easy to put in practice, but this year we have decision makers and officials that will actually keep us very close to the ground, keep us very close to the policy reality. And of course, mentioned again by Mirko, we will start, all the working groups will start promoting their ideas and promoting their policy recommendations very early on. And we will connect all the working groups, all the lead organizations will connect with the decision makers and the policy makers to make sure that what we propose in October in Tirana is not disconnected with the political reality, but it has been tested already. The ideas have been discussed with policymakers, and we hope that they will be much more actionable this time. Now, let me pass on to the floor to European Policy Institute from Skopje, from North Macedonia. I believe we have Stefan Ristovski with us. And this is the second working group, which we call Access to the European Single Market. Stefan, 5 minutes.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for the floor. As already mentioned, the European Policy Institute from Skopje has been tasked to organize the thematic working group on access to the European single market. Myself, our director Simonida Kacarska, and other members from the EP team will organize and lead the working group deliberations and public discussions. We want to thank you, the USF, ELIAMEP, and CDI, for giving us the privilege and entrusting us to organize the working group with a somewhat novel topic on the civil society and think tank forum. The next slide, please. To introduce the topic that we are going to discuss. As already mentioned, I think important to point out is that this forum is one of the largest gatherings that provided like-minded think tankers from the EU member states and from the Western Balkans to interact and feed in the intergovernmental dialogue and cooperation between the Western Balkans and the EU and its member states. So our working group will use the opportunity to feed in fresh ideas on the ongoing discussions on the accelerated integration or phasing in more widely than just the single market, but the European programs and policies. This is a debate that is ongoing, and we trust that this is a great platform to open up the discussion between the civil society. On the next slides, more specifically, we have as to the composition, as mentioned by Yanis already, we'll bring think tankers, academics, and practitioners on the topic covered by the working group from the Western Balkan 6 and the EU member states. As we reckon that having different views, knowledge, experience, and expertise will make no harm, but rather benefit the working group discussions. I would point out that we have rolled out the invitations, but still, if someone is interested and think that it can feed in the discussion, feel free to email me or Simonida. Our next slide, please. I think that one slide is missed regarding the topic, but early on. Yeah. Okay, we'll go then with the program. The working program is, as I said, scheduled online consultation events in June. It will happen in the next 2 weeks. The experts already registered, received the invitation, so we're going to discuss regarding 3 particular venues, as we call them, for economic integration and cooperation between the Western Balkans and the EU. After these sessions, we will continue with the public consultations probably after the holiday period in early September. But in between, we hope that will remain the interaction with the working group members as we plan to prepare a policy paper that will provide some policy recommendations from our working group. We plan, besides the public event, to interact directly with policymakers during advocacy visits, where we want to hold meetings and discuss our policy ideas and recommendations with the decision makers. That will be done with the Western Balkans and ones from the EU. Just to close, and I think that it's important to know how we are going to, what are the areas that we want to cover. There are 3 particular venues for cooperation, and that is association with the economic policy coordination mechanisms with the EU, including policy guidance, macroeconomic surveillance, and fiscal policies, and how to make use of existing instruments that are deployed or can be replicated for the Western Balkans from the EU. The second thing that we're going to discuss is to explore how to make full use of existing funds and make a case for new funds that the region can put in use to address connectivity gaps, including transport and digital infrastructure, also skills, knowledge gaps, lack of finance, etc. And lastly, we want to discuss, and probably very important, is deeper market integration to the European market, from identifying the products and services that are of joint strategic interest to the institutional arrangements for market liberalization and the integration, while ensuring that it is enabled a level playing field under European rules. Regional cooperation, and particularly the common regional market, as a stepping stone for this cooperation, will certainly be centered in our discussions. And we want to point out that, again, we will build upon on existing policy proposals that have been developed from the CSOs and think tanks. And we are very happy that some of them are already part of our working group and will feed in the discussion on how things can work for the Western Balkans. That would be it on my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Stefan. We are moving now to Sarajevo. It feels a bit like Eurovision, I have to say. The Balkan Eurovision, let's put it this way. Now, Darko Berkan is on behalf of Zastone, Why Not, organization, Civil Citizens Association organization from Bosnia and Herzegovina, and they are leading the 3rd working group on digitalization and connectivity. Darko, the floor is yours.
Hi, thank you for the invitation. Hello from Sarajevo. Basically, we will be running the digitalization and connectivity working group, and the topic we'll try to facilitate as many actors as possible within the group. And hereby I would like to thank the organizers for giving us this opportunity. Since this is like a huge area and covers so many topics, we've decided to, in order to be as efficient as possible and in order to have some tangible results, we've decided to kind of focus on one section of topics that are still quite huge in terms of policies, but like, we'll try to make it as simple as possible during the process. So basically, we've kind of taken the opportunity that recently there have been legislative and co-regulation activities in the EU that are treating the digital services and digital markets. So we want to kind of like, focus on those together with like, because the regulation and legislative activities are treating the big tech platforms, we want to increase the scrutiny on them in the region. And obviously, we want to increase the impact of the EU legislation in the region on these topics. So that's basically kind of using the processes that are already there and trying to preempt the events that will happen probably in the future anyways in the region. So let's go on to the topics, to the next slide. What are we trying to do is like, focus on the regional legislation, like the Digital Services Act, Digital Markets Act, and the strengthened code of practice against this information in order to transfer some of the solutions to the region, or to kind of figure out what are the most feasible ways to make these things happen in the region. So when we go into specific topics, we would like to kind of think of scaling some of the provisions that the DSA, DMA provide in terms of mostly online safety, minors protection, hate speech, but also some sections of that regulate the digital markets. In this manner, we would probably be like the digital part of the single EU market that the other group is doing. But like, we're still looking into specific policies that this would treat, and then potentially we want to do through the process the regional initiative to have the big platforms make some of the commitments to fighting disinformation in the Western Balkans 6 countries that are similar to the ones they made for the EU through the strengthened code of practice against disinformation. So this would be kind of like, the overall scope. We might shorten it down during the policy and consultations process, but this is the envisaged one so far by the working group. Next slide, please. The working group composition, basically it is CSOs dealing with digital rights and digital space in general, both in the region and in the EU. CSOs dealing with media and fighting disinformation, and the digital, part of information in general. Academia and researchers working on topics that are related to these issues. Obviously, so EU-based CSOs and experts that have been either participating in the process of developing DSA, DMA, and COP, and have been working on the similar issues. Potential experts from EU institutions that have dealt with these legislations, and of course regional public officials in the fields of media, communications, digital rights, and digitalization. So far, we have been very heavily working with the thematic working group. Basically, we have had a couple of consultations in person and a couple of online meetings. We even had the first big in-person meeting last week at the Point conference in Sarajevo, where we had some 20 plus members of the thematic working group joined on a brainstorming meeting that kind of will hopefully very soon result in some policies. And the next slide, or the final one. Okay, yeah. So regarding the engagement with the public, we will have we had already one public event, which will be the main public event of before the civil society forum, Point conference event on the issue that gathered some 200 people in Sarajevo, that discussed how we can use EU toolbox on the Balkans regarding the digital services and digital markets. We will have consultations through online platforms. We will have a public media and social media campaign. This is all regarding the public outreach, but obviously the working group will be contacting all the relevant stakeholders in the region, making consultations with them. Hopefully in September, definitely meeting with a lot of governmental counterparts in terms of trying to get advocacy on the way and trying to get as much commitments as possible for the civil society forum. So in brief, that would be it from me and the Digitalization Connectivity Working Group. Thank you.
Thank you, Darko. Now for the fourth thematic working group on climate and green agenda, led by the Institute for Good Governance and Policy for Environment and Climate Change, IPECC. We move back to Skopje and Jadranka Ivanova. Jadranka, floor is yours.
Hello, good afternoon to all of you here. Regards from Skopje. I left Tirana last week with not so good weather, but I understood today the weather is really nice there in Tirana, so I missed the sun. Thank you very much for the organizer to give us the privilege to lead the thematic working group on climate and green agenda, which we found a very overreaching group, which we touch almost all the other sub-working group. But what was more important to mention is that it is very relevant for the EU integration process. So that's why for us it was difficult to find what will be the topic that we will dive in more and analyze it and provide proposal for the recommendation for the leaders of the Berlin process. Next slide, please. So that's why we try to find a topics with the main topic, which is a kind of relevant for the EU integration and very important, which is green infrastructure in environment. And then we wanted to link it with two topics which actually cannot go without each other. It's a good governance and biodiversity protection and protection of natural resources. We found these topics as not being very a topic which have not been analyzed so far in terms of the EU integration and as part of the last year Berlin process recommendation. So that's why we focus ourselves on these topics. Next slide, please. We have someone speaking. Mirko, maybe you stop, you mute yourself because we can.
Sorry.
No problem. So what will be our key discussion point? For green infrastructure investment, we want to say that meeting the objective of the green agenda requires significant investment, especially when it comes to the EU integration. Here I would mention also the chapter 27, which is the costliest chapter to negotiate with during EU integration. And that's why investments are hugely needed. But on the other side, we have exponential development of the new legislation on the EU level, which comes because of the adoption of the Green Deal. And that is why, and it is because of that reflected into Green Agenda. So that in a way, we are creating a backlog, which is, growing all the time. And then the funds for investment, as they are now, are not sufficient to meet the EU requirements, which might have an implication of the EU integration process itself, because you join the EU with certain level implementation of the legislation and with all the chapters at once. So you cannot go, with one chapter. Because of that, we discussed that probably there is a need for new mechanism of funding for meeting the EU requirements, which could be based on solidarity and maybe having the cohesion logic and modus of operation. Cohesion funds logic and modus of operation. But on the other side, why we choose the good governance in environment as a topic, because even if you have a good sufficient amount of funds, still the administrative capacity needs to be increased in the Western Balkan countries. They are not sufficient to manage the current funding, but not to think about the new funding or the increasing of the funding as it is needed. On the other side, transparency and data collection should be improved in order to make a good prioritization. And of course, we still see that the leaders at the moment are neglecting somehow the environmental sector when it comes to capacity development. And not to mention, which is very important, is the local level. government, which we usually forgot, because in environment sector, in climate especially, the majority of the legislation are implemented by the local government. So we all have to take this into consideration. And lastly, is about biodiversity protection. If you see the strategy of EU on biodiversity, it says that almost 30% of all the funding related to climate should be actually implemented in biodiversity and restoration. So this is because of dramatic loss of biodiversity, which is included. But on the other side, we are still seeing that natural resources are not are overused, and maybe here more intervention are needed to include private sector, especially in circular economy. So on the other side, still budget very limited in terms of biodiversity. So through all these topics, we want to provide a recommendation in order to leaders to understand the requirements, to understand the need of more funding, but as well better governance, and not to neglect the biodiversity as such. Next slide, please. We have invited around 21 CSO to be part of this thematic working group. So far, 16 have been responded. You can find them in the slide. What we want with them to, we will have 3 thematic working group online meetings, where we will present the introduction paper and we will give the ground for development of the recommendation. We would have early September an event in Skopje dedicated to this thematic working group. And between, we would like to have some also public awareness activities and advocacy activities where we would speak with or communicate with the key decision makers. So to make our recommendation to be more to be realized as soon as possible, or at least to provide a ground for decisions that will support the implementation of the recommendation. Thank you very much. I hope I was within the time.
Thank you, Jadenka. Moving fast to the 5th thematic working group on mobility and migration, the Center Science and Innovation for Development in Tirana. And I think Bleriana Bino will present physically in the premises of the European House. Is that correct?
Yes, thank you, Ioannis. Great, okay, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. My name is Bleriana Bino. I am the co-founder and executive director of SciDev, a Tirana-based think tank. And on behalf of our organization, but also on behalf of all our collaborators, I am happy to present briefly today the preparatory work and the plan for our thematic working group, mobility and migration. We are honored and humbled at the same way to have been given this opportunity to participate and to contribute to the Civil Society Forum of the Berlin process. So we would like to extend our thanks to Open Society Foundation Western Balkans, Elia MEP, and of course CDI for their trust. We hope, we very much will strive to give some substantial contribution to this platform of dialogue, of course with the ultimate aim, as all the other colleagues and partners mentioned, to contribute to regional cooperation. If we can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. The focus of our thematic working group will be actually on mobility. As it was mentioned also by Ms. Barbolusha in the first panel, this is also a policy priority for the entire region. And we are looking into 2 particular aspects: inclusive regional mobility and mobility-driven innovation and knowledge transfer within the Western Balkans and beyond. In the first, let's say, subtopic, this concept extends beyond physical mobility, includes academic exchange, cultural exchanges, collaboration between educational, cultural, research and innovation institutions. And the focus here will be to build upon what has already been achieved in this regard in the Western Balkans, but also look more into how this mobility can be more inclusive and widespread, beneficial for all, in order to tackle social and economic disparities. And the second subtopic is the mobility-driven innovation and knowledge transfer. We want to investigate the role of mobility in driving innovation, knowledge and technology transfer in the Western Balkans and with the European Union. This will encompass initiatives that leverage the movement of researchers, academics, entrepreneurs, professional students, creative industry experts, civil society experts within and beyond the region. And we want to stimulate the exchange of ideas, catalyze research and development collaboration, facilitate technology transfer, and encourage innovation ecosystem collaborations within the Western Balkans and with the EU. If we can move to the next one, please. Some of our key, let's say, discussion points for forming a shared advocacy agenda and policy recommendation will be on fostering this inclusive regional mobility, enhancing mobility-driven innovation, but also engaging and mobilizing the diaspora in this regard and leveraging their resources, facilitating return and reintegration, and also strengthening research and innovation collaboration at the regional level to be more competitive also at the European research and higher education system. The next one, please. So to facilitate the work of this thematic working group, we have prepared a list of potential collaborators that include representatives from civil society and think tanks in Albania, in the region, but also in the EU, academic institutions, but also representative from international institutions, regional networks, and also organizations that work particularly on innovation, knowledge transfer, and mobility. In terms of engagement with the public, thank you. We will, pretty much similar to all the other working groups, we will organize consultations, online 5 meetings to be held in July, and then we will have a public event in early September in Tirana to provide initial recommendations, let's say, based on the research and preparatory and consultation work that we will be doing. We have also planned advocacy actions within the region, but also in the EU member states, as well as dedicated communication campaign and bilateral engagement with particular stakeholders. And we have set up also a dedicated communication channel for this working group. In conclusion, we hope that these recommendations will be as concrete as expected and will be also endorsed at the Leaders Summit in October in Tirana, but most importantly as well to engage public awareness on this issue and to strengthen collaboration between stakeholders in Albania and the Western Balkans and with the European Union. Thank you very much for your attention today, and our invitation is open for all of you to join our work. Thank you.
Thank you, Bleriana. Moving on to the 6th thematic working group on security and geopolitics, led by the Kosovo Center for Security Studies, KCSS. Dani Lazi, I think, will present from Pristina. Dani, the floor is yours.
All right. Thank you, Yanis, so much. It's a real pleasure to be with you all today. I want to thank whoever is left back in Tirana with us. I want to also express my appreciation that from what I can see, your data and on at least are there. So very, very important to have your ears on this presentation. Of course, next slide, please. As an organization, we have been invited to lead a consultation on geopolitics and security. We have, in close consultation with partners, we have decided to focus this consultation on regional security cooperation. We think that regional security cooperation is a pillar of peace and stability in the region, and greater regional security cooperation integration would ultimately help the region further in European integration and also strengthen the capacity and resilience of the region to counter many of the issues with which we are facing today, including malign foreign influence. And here, of course, we're talking about Russia, China, but Iran as well, that was mentioned. Another aspect that we will focus on is how the region can work better together in tackling corrosive capital and FDI. This is a particularly technical and concrete issue where without cooperation, it is very difficult for the region to effectively tackle these issues because in screening of the FDI, if one country in the region for example, screens a particular company or a capital, but the rest don't follow up, it's very easy that can further expand or penetrate the region. We're also looking at alignment with the EU's common and foreign security policy. And here, particularly, we're looking at the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the countries that have aligned fully with EU's policies and what is that costing to the countries, and if there is any way the EU can help. This is in a way an emerging policy recommendation on this implementable recommendation, and I think this might not perhaps be welcome because it might cost some money, but we think that countries who are fully aligning with EU CFSP are really having a concrete cost, and they should be helped. Another aspect we're looking at is how reconciliation or lack of reconciliation and bilateral disputes are affecting regional security cooperation. We're looking at the political will, but also we're looking at the capacities at operational level. So it's not perhaps just the political will, but is there capacity and willingness at the lower level, at the technical level, to cooperate on security issues. Next slide, please. In terms of our approach, we have already had a successful first consultation meeting with the thematic working group. We have invited a wide range of experts, policymakers, and representatives from think tanks from the region and the EU, and we had a very good discussion. We have also established a working group or a core group of experts that will attend each of the 3 online consultation meetings that we will have. And these members of the core group will provide that consistency, and each will be tackling a particular issue that will emerge from the consultation process. And you can see in the slide the members of the core group with each of the 6 Western Balkan countries represented here. The next slide. In terms of engagement with the public, as other colleagues, we also have planned a public event or a roundtable on July 20th in Pristina to kind of present our initial findings from the consultation process and the recommendations, and in a way filter them through that a more in-depth discussion on July 20th. We are also going to work with the media to promote that event, and of course, we are going to disseminate to a wide audience of stakeholders the findings and the policy recommendations. And I think we also draw from ideas from other working groups, thematic working groups, who included ideas such as op-eds or other media relevant activities. So I think there will be a lot of interest in this from the public, considering the Russian invasion of Ukraine, considering what is happening right now in the Balkans and so on. Thank you, Yanis. This is from me. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. Thank you.
Thank you, Danny. And last but not least, the working group on the politics of enlargement, led by our own Eliamet. And I invite Anna Kristinovska from Skopje to present, my colleague, Eliamet colleague, to present the working group. Thank you. Anna? Okay.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. Given that I'm the last one, I hope that you still have some patience left and will bear with me. This is the final thematic working group, and what sets it out from the rest of the groups and topics is that it does not deal with policy, but it deals with politics. Because, and if we could move to the next slide, please. Regardless how successful all of the above mentioned policies are, it is still the politics of enlargement that allows them to have some meaningful effect on the progress that all the candidate countries have towards their full EU accession. And we see that enlargement is becoming an increasingly political issue in the past few years for a number of reasons that you can see on your right-hand side. So there are bilateral disputes between EU member states and candidate countries, between EU candidate and potential candidate countries themselves. There have been numerous crises that have led to internal challenges and internal reluctance in the EU to accept new member states. Then on the side of the Western Balkans, there are also efforts to somehow instrumentalize the relationship with the EU and the accession process for domestic purposes. We do not see, unfortunately, the reforms being conducted at a sufficient pace. So we call this, in a way, reform fatigue. And all of these aspects have been somehow translated into a new approach, the new methodology that we had several years ago. But today, even the very sponsor of the new methodology, President Macron, has some doubts regarding how efficient the new methodology is and whether it is able to seize all these new political dynamics in the process, especially stemming from the big shadow or the big cloud that is the war in Ukraine. So because of all these reasons, we can argue that enlargement is no longer the same process it was not only 10 years ago, but even a year ago. And within our topic, we will try to determine the key factors that shape the process at present. We will try to understand the blocking factors, and we will try to define some key policy measures and recommend them in order to spearhead the process on different terms, short-term, mid-term, and long-term. Could we move on to the next slide, please? That is why we structured the workings of our thematic group in 3 sessions. The first 2 sessions will take place before the summer holidays. The first one will deal with the current geopolitical context, deriving mostly from the war in Ukraine and its impact on enlargement. Arguably, there is some impetus and momentum that we are all seeing, and that is unfortunately credited to the war in Ukraine and to the enlargement towards Ukraine, but also to a certain extent Moldova. So we will try to see how all these impacts the Western Balkan accession. In the second session, we will try to focus more on the domestic reforms and to see how we can unblock the reform potential in order to speed up the progress in the Western Balkans reform agenda. Then during the summer, we will work on the preparation of a draft for a policy paper. We will have that in a draft form somewhere by the beginning of September, when we will continue with the third session. It will focus on identifying outside the box ways to move the process further and to make best possible use of the current momentum. But it will also take stock of the events that will be assuming happening in the meantime, because we are still waiting to see how the announced 4-pillar plan of President von der Leyen is to be deployed and operationalized. Alongside the third session, which will be hybrid, so physically in Athens and online also. We will host a one-day open conference as a way to engage a broader audience, so not only the core members of the thematic working group. And if we could move on to the next slide, please. So we will have the inclusion of a number of stakeholders, policymakers, both from the executive and legislative branches of government, civil society analysts and activists, and academia, and all 3 from the Western Balkans, but also from key member states, in order to have also this outside perspective on enlargement, as it was mentioned, and not stay within our own Western Balkan bubble. And we will also do our best to include, to the extent possible, representatives from the EU institutions. And the final slide, please. So as I mentioned, we will have a number of outputs that will be disseminated in different forms. We will have online briefing with the media. We will have social media campaign and op-eds once we have some tangible recommendations and findings. And finally, we will also engage with identified stakeholders, namely policymakers, in a number of advocacy visits, as we have been doing so far, but we are also planning to organize and host a series of advocacy meetings in September in Athens. Thank you very much for your attention, and I remain available if you have any questions.
Thank you, Anna. I think it's very important to reinforce, stress this point that maybe for the first time in the after more than 10, 15 years, maybe the politics of development seem to be on the side of the Western Balkans. I think we have grown accustomed for many years to think that, well, no matter how much work the Western Balkans are doing to get closer to the European Union, the politics are not good for that. So, well, for various reasons, when you know which are those reasons, now the politics are on the side of the candidates for the Western Balkans, but we don't know for how long. And I think we should seize the momentum, and this is, of course, the whole concept also of this year's Civil Society Forum, as was mentioned earlier, also by Andrea de Bruce. And with that, I will give back the floor to Franco, I think, if I'm not mistaken, for the discussion with the audience.
Thank you very much indeed, Yanis, for your elegant and thoughtful moderating this panel, and congratulations to all the panelists for being clear on the point all the time and respecting the 5-minute deadline. Thank you very much indeed. And now we move on to, if we can move to this place, Andy, Odeta. We will be joined in this panel by the Research Director of the Cooperation and the Development Institute, Mr. Ardian Hachkai. Welcome. Thank you very much. Before we start to take questions, I just wanted to congratulate Andy for this launch. Indeed, quite clear and very dynamic, and the right persons at the right place at the right time. Congratulations. We are open now. After the first two sessions, we are open to you to get your questions, and the panelists here and there will be able to answer them. So who wants to break the ice and be the first?
I would say break the heat, you know.
Okay. Okay, dear Garon, thank you.
Okay. Okay. Duke falendëruar pjesëmarrësit dhe organizatorët për këtë aktivitet, unë kisha një pyetje qoftë për panelistët, po qoftë edhe për ata që na ndjekin online. Duke qenë se procesi i Berlinit vitin tjetër mbush 10 vjet.
Can you switch on to English, please?
Yes.
Okay.
Taking account that the Berlin process is going to have a 10th anniversary next year, I have a question for panelists and even for the think tanks which are attending online. Do they think that is the time that except the Berlin process +2 or +3 is going to lobbying and advocate to European Union for a target date for membership for Western Balkan countries?
Wow.
Thank you.
It's quite a journalistic question, actually. Odeta, would you like to answer? We're running against the clock, actually. So, Odeta, the floor is yours.
I think this is...
It's okay.
This is an important question.
Yeah.
Civil society has indeed lobbied continuously. for a clear and predictable plan for the EU integration of the entire region. I think what we need now, also in the context of the new methodology, which was discussed here, but in particular in the context of the war in Europe, I think it is that civil society sort of becomes or joins the efforts of governments in the region to ask for an enhanced relationship which makes sense, which is translated into concrete actions and into concrete support for the region for the next decade. So I mentioned, there is a reason why I mentioned next decade. We must start discussing now also the next budget, the next 7 years package for the financial support, the pre-accession, but let's call it pre-structural. And when I say that, I have in mind that in 1997, when then the smaller EU was preparing the strategy for a stronger and larger Europe, I may get the name a bit wrong, but that's, I think, very broadly a paraphrased title of the strategy. It took into account that it would be a broader, a larger union with the new members in 2004. So the instruments that was planning for were instruments which would be adequate and would respond to the needs of a larger union. I think now that's what we need. If we are to take the political commitment seriously, and I think it is a serious commitment on the part of the EU, but that now needs to be translated into a strategy which has more enhanced instrument, more tailor-made instruments, if you like, to respond to the needs of a larger union with the Western Balkans in, and to the needs of this region to converge with and catch up with the rest of Europe.
Thank you. Arjan, would you like to add something?
In my traditional way of replying, lobby for an access date, de jure, no. It's impossible and it will not be realistic. De facto, every day, tomorrow, today. What does it mean? It means that we cannot control what will be discussed within the 27, as the Ambassador Zingraf rightly pointed out. Enlargement, convergence, cohesion, staged accession are issues that are discussed on the 27. What can we do in the framework of our own initiatives, so we have agency, in this case the Berlin process, is to make Europe happen every day in whatever we do, with the reforms, with regional cooperation, with common regional market, with the open Balkans. I mean, if we want to mobilize all this, let's say, positive energy and ownership here in the region, as Odeda mentioned, maybe it's time to find allies, to do what has been done. And again, I mean, I'm not saying it enough, chapeau to OSF. And also I want to mention Claudian and Maria, for those that know them, for this wonderful job.
Okay. Andy, would you like to add something?
No, because there was one reason we are co-organizing it jointly with CDI, you know, so that includes also the same line of thinking, but exactly, I mean, it's a very important question, but it's also a trap question, you know, like getting a date.
Yeah.
Because as Ardian mentioned, like it's not up to us, and one of the things that we're trying to do this time with this event is, as I mentioned in my previous presentation during the panel, is to be realistic and to go for those objectives which are implementable in the next time. And as Arjan rightly pointed, you know, like let's bring the EU home, you know, every day in what we do through various formats, whether they are regional cooperation, whether it is Berlin process or any other process that that the region takes initiative, because it is obvious the region is very volatile, it's very delicate, balances are very fragile, and having a date, I don't think it would solve much, you know, like, I mean, there are different schools of thoughts here, you know, but in terms of the agency and urge that the date would give, but let's be realistic. I think for us the most important thing is to take full account of where we are and what is our place in the bigger picture. You know, we think sometimes that the Balkan is the center of the world, And unfortunately for us, it's not, you know. So we should be very, very realistic in what we aim to achieve, based also on the issues and problems and internal issues that the European Union has itself, you know, to solve first, you know, then to open and the door. I mean, we're knocking, we're pushing, we're kicking the door anytime we can, you know. The thing is that, you know, how much we're heard is a different story, and that depends on 27 member states and not on a handful of countries that deal with the Berlin process. So.
Thank you, Andy. I just wanted to ask the online panelists if there is someone who has got something to say on this question.
Franco, I would like to say a couple.
Please do, Yanis.
Yeah. So yeah, like my colleague said, a target date is actually not realistic. It would probably be counterproductive at this point. However, at the same time, and of course I could mention here that the Greek Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis mentioned the date 2030 some time ago, but it really didn't fly in the EU. That's why I don't think it's been mentioned since again. However, even though there is an aversion to specific dates in the EU right now, at the same time, I think the Western Balkan countries, but also the think tank community in the EU and in the Western Balkans that deals with enlargement should also work against the idea that even though we don't have specific dates, that it does not mean that we should not see something happening in the near future. And I think we should go away from the concept of big bang enlargement of the Western Balkans. I think we should see some Western Balkan country of more than one, maybe two, in the near future join the EU, just to show to the Balkans that it is possible. Otherwise, maybe, you know, we will continue being accustomed to the idea that the more we talk about enlargement, the less it will happen. And just as a point of reference, and I will close with that, and this is something to remind also to the EU member states, including Greece. Of course, I come from Greece. We have now, since Croatia joined, 10 years and counting. This, and of course, it will be several years till next country will join, maybe Montenegro, maybe it will be Albania. Why not, if Albania does the homework fast? This will be the longest periods in the last 50 years between two enlargement waves. So 10 years already is the longest, and of course it will be even longer, 14, 15, 16 years, who knows how many. So I think we need to explain to the EU member states also that, yeah, we are not putting an end date because this is already very dangerous and very unpopular, but at the same time, we should remind you that enlargement is a successful policy and it should come back in the picture, and it should be one or two countries that in the near future should be encouraged and to go to the finish line.
Thank you very much indeed, Yanis. Just wanted to get another question from the audience, if there is one. As you are standing, at the beginning I said I worked for the BBC, but I'm not the only one in this room, because Nazi worked there as well. Nazim Rashidi from North Republic of Macedonia. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Franco.
The floor is yours.
Thank you, Franco, for the introduction. As a journalist, I covered this issue for so many years, and what we see right now is maybe more a disappointment from people that they don't believe in this process of enlargement. But this initiative is really encouraging in what sense? Because, as already mentioned, it will bring maybe some realistic points that where we stand as a societies and also as a governments in this process. And I think that a lot of people and also government probably are stuck in the idea of EU of 2000 or 2000s, let's say, where it was a different EU in the perspective. And when we say EU enlargement, we probably still think of that kind of EU, but EU has changed, we have changed, and now we have a war, so we need a different perspective or realistic perspective. So my question is, would after this process that you're going to do, if there is let's say answers to your studies that probably will say that the EU enlargement will not happen in 2030, and the government in North Macedonia also is aiming this this date, would you be courageous to say it and then probably I don't know, envisage some different ideas of Western Balkans and EU and their cooperation? Thank you.
Let's hope that we won't put this question, but who
we should
would
be
like
realistic.
to answer? Because I don't want to put pressure on anyone, but for some reasons, Andy, you are the organizer.
No, very, very quickly and right to the point. Thank you so much for the question. You know, it's how can I put it? It's in a mild terms. You know, it's a conundrum in itself. You know, because of course the public opinion has this desire, like to see. You know, like it is decreasing. You know, like to a certain extent. It's not like I think it reflects also the mood in general in the region. But I still think it's very high in terms of public opinion expression. We are trying to respond. The civil society in the entire region is responding to this new context. You know, like as I mentioned, it's a different world for everyone. Unfortunately for us in the region, as I said, we're caught in two worlds. You know, like and we have to basically find a way to keep the momentum, and that's why I mentioned it, because the momentum is very, very important. And discussing about various options there, whether it's gradual integration or whether it's staged accession. And I think these ideas, like maybe not in their entirety, but in various segments of those, they contain very important elements which I think they are being embraced by the policymakers and the governments, slowly and gradually. But as whether the Berlin process is the forum for this, the right forum, we all agree that it's not exactly. I mean, that we use the Berlin process as a catalyst for this ideas, but I think they have a much broader forum for discussing these ideas, and I think there is a strong advocacy that is going on and is taking place now with various colleagues, you know, from Belgrade, from Skopje, from Sarajevo, from everywhere, from Podgorica and Tirana as well. You know, there are many people who are not present here who are taking part in various events in parallel formats, exactly because trying to push this kind of new ideas, you know, like because there are too many new ideas. Sometimes too many ideas are not exactly the best thing, you know. Like of course the plurality is more than welcome, but in our region, I think we have to focus exactly on those which are implementable, which talk to the convergence, which talk to the connectivity, which talk to issues and topics which are very, very relevant. And I see these topics as the bridge to a fixed date, to a date, you know, not the date per se. I think we should forget about the date at some point, you know, because it's too bigger of obsession for us, you know. Instead, we should focus like on the day-to-day, you know, like, and what we need to do to bring ourselves first closer with each other in terms of regional cooperation. And when I say regional cooperation, we talk about all the dimensions of that cooperation, whether it's political, economical, social, mobility, and all the topics that we mentioned here, because those are very important. And then how to move as a bloc, you know, towards the EU. I think that's the best and easiest way to do and to go about this. But if we use some parts of this discussion that in October or even preceding that, one of the working thematic groups exactly speaks, the last one speaks on the enlargement, you know, so definitely we need to discuss, and this is our own discussion, whether we extrapolate from that one or two or three topics which we need to take with the policy makers and decision makers, why not? But I don't think this should be an aim per se, you know, like I think all the components that we are pushing to put as evidence out there, I think they are all going in the direction of the integration, and I'm sure and certain I'm not saying any new thing here for also the colleagues online, you know, which are very, very interesting, still very, very interested, you know, after 2 hours of this conversation. So, thank you.
And let's hope that the methodology will not change after the elections in other European countries. Okay, Adrian?
Add up, basically, and just repeating what Andris said, I mean, overloading Berlin process with expectations, it's weakening the Berlin process. And coming back to your question, basically, I liked very much the difference that you made between the government and the citizen, because this provides a very good avenue to explore the new enlargement. So when we talk about enlargement, we all talk about that fatidic date when our leaders, our prime ministers and our presidents will sit in the Council of Ministers of the EU, right? Because this is what we need, what we mean by full membership. Frankly, it's not my problem, I don't care. What the citizen is concerned with is to have Europe here, not if I mean, our politicians will be able to be dealt with as equal in Brussels. These are separate issues. They work together, they must go together because we have this legitimacy, these democratic institutions, and this is how the EU is done. But our citizens, they have shown that they are able to take decisions either to find Europe by themselves, by moving to Western Europe, or coming back here and building their little Europe of them, you know, in their businesses, in their schooling, in their family and everything. Oases or islands of Europe, European islands in the Western Balkans. What we are trying to do here is for those islands, first of all, not to be submerged, given also the climate change, but also to grow bigger and bigger, to connect with each other and to become a continent, and afterwards to connect permanently with the EU. It's different. But our politicians do, this is enlargement. What we do as society, as businesses, it's accession, it's reforms, it's rule of law, it's everything.
Thank you. And Ms. Barbalushi, would you like to say one final thought and then we move to the...
Yeah, I feel I must say something to this question as a representative
it's
of government.
close to your heart, isn't it?
But unsurprisingly, what I'm going to say doesn't differ much from what was said from civil society representatives. So I think that also goes to show that this debate about enlargement and about enhancement of the relationship of the EU with the Western Balkans, phasing in state integration, has brought actually government and non-government actors together. And my first point to finish with my intervention would be what I think civil society does here, the main contribution is not only with expertise, even though that's very important to bring implementable ideas, concrete ideas, as Andy was saying, but also to create something which comes, I think, closest to the idea in practice of a public sphere, of a regional public sphere. And that is important both in terms of expertise, but also in terms of having a platform of well, interested or non-interested or non-strategic discussion on what the future of the region is. And I think that also puts, if you like, also pressure on governments and decision makers in the capitals elsewhere, what is needed to be done, what needed to be done for cooperation to happen in practice. We had that last year with the 3 mobility agreements. You know, it was not easy to broker the agreements. We worked very closely with the German government, with RCC, with regional organizations, but I think the contribution of civil society is very instrumental in that. The second point I'd like to make, I think, goes very much in line with what was said previously. As we sort of negotiate bilaterally with the EU, it's very important that as a region, as 6 of us, we can say that in 5 years' time we'll be able, like, let's say, to have a digital union with the EU, like in the same way we have with transport community or energy community.
Partial.
Or let's say, now that the countries are part of the European Alliance of European Universities, which was launched in Tirana in the summit in December, now we can say, now we are full, all of us, 6 of us, full members of the mechanisms and infrastructure of research, European research infrastructure and mechanisms. Or in 2 years' time, we'll be part of another let's say, mechanism which brings us closer with the EU. And in that sense, it's very important both legally, because we'll have the same rules, binding rules with the EU, and it will be also important in a practical sense, because it will prepare us for a full-fledged membership to the single market. But that is not to distract us from the objective. As economists show, a full convergence only becomes possible when the countries are fully part of the economies of the single market and so on. So it's, I think, very important for us to keep now this flexibility, given that what was said, integration is not the same, EU accession is not the same, and the EU is not the same, and situation in Europe has changed. So we need to keep this flexibility of having two tiers along which we work. So whether we ask, should the civil society say no, there will be no integration, I think civil society can tell us, but also the public opinion better, can help us communicate what can be achievable in 2 years' time, 3 years' time, 5 years' time, while we move along the accession path individually.
Thank you. And at this moment, I would like to pass the floor to Mr. Ardian Hachkai for the wrap-up and the conclusions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It is I'm really honored to be the last one and to kind of translate my notes, because the work that has been done, it's impossible, into some intermediate conclusions, and I'll try to be quick. First of all, what is incredible comparing, what is the real progress compared with previous summits, is the degree of the preparation that has gone into this event until now. So, I mean, basically what we can see, it's not one part of the iceberg, it's much, much more efforts that have been done, have been going since, I would say, even before the end of the year, last year, yeah. And many, many thanks to ESF and to Andy, because it's your personal project, so this is the first thing. Second, what we have gone now, I mean, this first phase has been a very intensive interaction between, let's say, the hardcore or the core people of our project, core organizations, with the working groups, which has made possible this kind of incredibly professional, structured, and well-timed presentations that we all followed until now. The second phase, which is ongoing, because as it was said by our colleagues, it's happening already. It is the phase of going into the ground, getting contacts with all the stakeholders, with the relevant beneficiaries, with policymakers, from each working group in its own sector. So this is the second phase, which will come to the term by before the end of the summer. At this point, we can say that the scoping exercise is over. We know what's going on. We know what we will deal in the next few months. It has been achieved a better understanding of what is operationable and what is the institutional framework. So basically, who are the actors and who are the policies. And this is very important, because by knowing which policies are applicable, civil society will be able to find what we call entry points, because it's all very beautiful to make, I would say, knowledgeable discourse and findings, but if they are not embedded into the policy making, basically the outcome, the desirable outcome, has not been reached. And as Andy mentioned, at least 4 times that I counted, the conclusions must be implementable. Another point that has been mentioned sometimes, but I think that it will take even more relevance during the work that the working groups will be done, will be the costing. It is all very good to come to the politicians. It is very easy for us to say to the politicians, you should do this, you should do that, but every decision must be costed. And at the end of the day, policy making is an arbitration between resources. So this is the next, let's say, relevant exercise. I mentioned the entry points. Another element that has come up in the discussion has been the added value points of the CSO engagements. So basically now the exercise would be to convince policymakers to convince policymakers that we offer a real added value, not only documents, not only a to-do list that can be checked out, consulted or heard civil society, but also to make them think about any proposal that will come from this exercise. A very important feature that was mentioned many times that I would like to underline, because it's one of the main features of the CSF 2023, Tirana CSF, is the early connections with the policymakers. The fact that ODETA has become a non-official member of the Civil Society Forum, it's a very strong witness of this engagement, also of the Albanian government, to hear of what's going on up here, and hopefully, if the conclusions are good and implementable, fifth time, to bring it up. Another point that was mentioned, that was not mentioned per se, but it's like a red line that goes through all the working groups, is this slight but very sensible shift from a watchdog role of civil society towards being an actor. We have been watchdogs, and in the watchdog there is watch and there is dog role for the last 20 years plus. The idea would be to move an actor, the actor status, and this is extremely important. I would like to add here, it was not mentioned, but I'd like to add that in the framework of the Berlin process, there is also the parliamentary dimension that is taking a lot of importance. There are colleagues from ICDS, if I hope I pronounce well, in Skopje that are developing it, and they are in contact with Tirana and with Andy to see how it can bring forward, and this is extremely important. And I'd like to mention, with what Odeta mentioned, is that the role that Civil Society Forum has in creating a regional public sphere, because it's national, it has been sectoral, but now it's becoming a regional, it's a regional platform, a regional agora, where we can, if you're good, we can have our impact, we can engage with the policy making. However, we should not overload Berlin process with expectations, so as not to fall into the errors that have been done by former, let's say, organizers, where everybody has been adding to the agenda what was important for the state at the time of the organization. This is all what I wanted. I mean, transversal takeovers from a discussion, otherwise everything is perfectly mentioned in the PowerPoint.
Thank you very much indeed, Ardian. And I just wanted to add just one final sentence. Odeta mentioned public sphere, which is absolutely crucial for successful procedures in the future. And don't forget the media. This is my last sentence. Okay, thank you very much indeed for coming here, to all the members in the audience. Very warm thank you to all the panelists who are online. Thank you very much for your contribution and for your patience. And I would like to thank Ardian Hachkai, Odeta Barbulushi, and Andy Dobrushi for their presence here. Thank you very much indeed, and hope to see you soon in the future. Thank you.